Hi, and welcome to Yeshiva Sheva Aver. I'm Rabbi David Katz. This is Parashas Vayeishev. The title of the article, which has been posted on the blog, it's going to be a set routine for this year's cycle based on scheduling and circumstance. The article is going to go up now on Sundays, and the class will be on Monday. Yeah, it's like I don't know if the right word is matinee, but after the weekend, sometimes in America you have the event continues through Sunday, Monday, in the entertainment world, because it starts up again on like Tuesday, Wednesday, the new week. So we're picking up the tail end of the parsha, which is good because somebody's got to do it. And the encampments in the desert, I don't know if you guys maybe heard, the tribe of Dan was the one that was the last in the encampment. They picked up all the loose articles that were lost in the encampment. So let's consider ourselves the tribe of Dan, for all intents and purposes, of picking up the slack of the parsha. So therefore, you can see on the blog the article, which is entitled "The Wise One or the Prophet." And some articles I don't get redundant or repetitive. Sometimes it's a lot of information. This week is one of those weeks where this is the theme. You're going to see in the article, as in the explanation, it is just this, reiterated over and over. Is it wisdom or is it prophecy? From a million different angles, but is it wisdom or is it prophecy? The Hebrew, just so you know, I put this in the brackets, it's important. There's a famous concept that the yeshivas throw around. Chacham adif manavi. The wise one is preferable to the prophet. That requires understanding what that means. Remind me to tell you what it means after class. I don't want to say it now, so it'll just spoil the class. So if anybody remembers or is interested to know what it means, remind me and I'll explain based on what we explained in the article. Obviously, you're going to say it means the wise man is preferable to the prophet. So how we interpret it correctly will be based on the end of the article. Okay. As always, we open with the Haftorah. Go into some Zohar learning just for a wide range of material. Usually you find a consistent blend, and then let's hit the article. Okay. The Haftorah we can say in one word. Joe, can you type that word? One word describes the entire Haftorah, the entire Zohar, and the entire article. Again, it's that kind of a week. That word is, Joe's looking like he's going to type it here. I know he's going to, there you go. I would have said prophecy, Joe. Prophecy. That is the essence of the Haftorah. We can go into it, but there's really no need. The Haftorah latches on to the essence of the parsha and points out, which again, the reason why I came onto this myself was not because of the Haftorah. I had actually done the Zohar before the Haftorah, and the Zohar goes on to this. The emphasis of the prophet/prophecy over wisdom, or that which is devoid of prophecy. The Zohar makes it pretty clear. So by the time I got into the article, I knew the parsha, I knew where we were going, and the Haftorah made it absolutely clear that is what this is about. And this is not 70-30, this is not 80%, 20%. The Haftorah, the Zohar, and the points made is there has to be an existential change to our approach to Torah, learning, relationship with God, you name it. We have to get in the mindset of prophecy. Now, the problem is that sounds really, really dodgy, right? When we hear prophet, we're thinking, okay, so I'm the next Moses, right? God's going to tell me, to go do stuff. No, that really is a poor rendition of the word prophet. or prophecy. Now, it did happen. Moses did hear the mouth of God. People were commanded text. They wrote it. Yet that is not our function in the future. The vua means to become upon. That you want to render yourself into a proper vessel so that God's presence should interact with you. You want a relationship with God. You want God, to rest his divine presence on you. And with that, you're aroused with God, and revelation comes. It doesn't have to be from wisdom and figuring out what to do. Sometimes God makes it apparent. I'm sure everybody in this room has had moments of inspiration. Right? You're struggling with an issue, and God simply makes it known what to do. Well, imagine a world of inspired people where God dwells amongst man. Right? God's inspiration rests amongst man. You have a temple standing on the Temple Mount. In the Holy of Holies is the Shekhinah. Out of Zion comes Mazal, the God's manifest, spiritual hand in creation, working with people relating with God, having revelation of God, people enjoying or being with the goodness of God, the closeness of God, God in your life. That kind of reality is prophetic, right? Let's say, for example, a very gross, rough example. But let's say you right now, you're sitting here not listening to this class because you're really bothered. You have to do something when class is over and you can't remember for the life of you what it is. And you want to listen to the class and you're saying, man, what is it? I forget what I had to do. And, 2/3 in, I say, just something, I'm just making this up, right? I say, good golly, Miss Molly, go to the store and buy a cucumber. I make a weird, saying, and you say, that's it. I had to buy cucumbers for lunch tomorrow. So those it's a little bit fantastic what I just said, but those little divine messages that we get, imagine a world, this is the word in Hebrew, mazal. Mazal is the revelation of God's interaction with man, but invested through men. So Rabbi Katz is a guy in Sfat, not anywhere near you in terms of physical space, maybe not even on an emotional wavelength, because I'm teaching and you're not talking to me directly. Yet, if you listen and you learn how to pay attention to the world, most likely man, because man speaks. Dolphins they say do speak, but animals in general don't speak our language. That might be debated, not for now. When we are trained to listen to mankind and really engage on a soul level, you'll find that you can commune with God. It's strange. It's all the meditative masters of old taught this. This is the prophecy of Shem and Aver. When Shem and Aver taught prophetic powers and how to do it, this is what they taught. How to receive revelation from God. And it comes from mankind. So that when we speak, when we walk about, when we are taking our blessing of conquering the world, right? 6th day of creation, mankind is to subdue the earth. When we get a worldwide Torah, let's say God-fearing society out of Zion, and everybody is going in the same direction, all energies are flowing towards God. We are workers for God. You'll begin to witness how close God really is, and then how God makes himself known even unbeknownst to the person that made it known to you. You might call it divine providence. You might call it the help of heaven. Eventually, you'll begin to call it mazal, your spiritual domain with God. Then you'll begin to realize that your spiritual domain with God has a pattern, or let's say a way, a derech, a way. a personality, a definable terms of agreement. That God works with us in certain ways, and when we're perceptive to how God works with us. Now, this is not to take away free will, and quite the contrary. It's based on your free will. Through your free will, you understand how you interact with the divine. Okay, that is the basic concept of prophecy that will return. The flip side of this is, you never listen to what I'm saying. You don't listen for the mark about the cucumbers. You assume it doesn't even exist. Instead, you try to multitask, listen to the class, and you're trying to figure out the cucumbers, and through wisdom, you come to lesser conclusions. I think we can see the obvious difference. One is a divine society, a divine lifestyle. One is a very, sad to say it, egotistical, self-centered universe. My wisdom is everything. I am smart. I can figure it out. That's a lot of you. Otherwise, God will let it be known, God willing, where are you? You're right. You don't exist. It's God. The Torah in history, in the last 2,000 years of history, which are called the 2,000 years of the Messiah, where the Torah time period of the previous 2,000 years has been committed to writing. The exegesis of the Torah, sadly, has become rather wisdom-based. People are using wisdom scenarios in a Torah universe that is not of wisdom at all. When Moses makes a decision, he's not necessarily doing it from wisdom. He's doing it from revelation. And when we understand a reality that is divine, we can then begin to understand how great the Torah universe is. Now, Moses is going to be a hard one because he heard the voice of God literally. God may say, Moses, get up, walk 300 yards, turn around and come back. Now, it's going to be pretty hard for me as an armchair quarterback to identify that's what happened. But there are lesser prophets all the way through. And this week's Parsha is perhaps the greatest example that exists. The tribes in Joseph are, at least according to the Haftorah and Zohar, our week in history every year to really witness, study, observe. Let's call it young prophecy that yields a revelation to the onlooker. This is the story in the Torah, one out of 53 parshiot, where we get an inside look at prophecy in the making. If we grasp it, perhaps then we can bring it into our own lives, prepare for the end of days, hopefully, and really begin to understand the Torah not as a smart text, but as a prophetic text that we all know it truly is. I just want to say a couple of things from the Zohar, random points that really don't add up to the class, but I like to throw them in because they were there and they're important. There's a famous law that when you wake up in the morning, you're to wash your hands at bedside and recite the prayers. Because you wake up with an impurity from your sleep called Ruach Ra, and a foul spirit. Because what you do is when you sleep, you're really rectifying your day's events. And the residue that comes off is left on the fingers. The book, the halachic book, the law book is called the Mishnah Brura, which was written about 100 years ago by the Chafetz Chaim. It says that he quotes the Zohar, if you don't wash your hands, you're chayev misa, obligated to die. Now that sounds a little harsh. And people say, we've never seen the Zohar. I really, it was a bracha. In this week's Parsha in the Zohar, it says something very interesting. It talks about the washing of the hands and the nature of the severity of the impurity and all the things that happen. And what's fantastic is that nobody has ever been able to find where this law comes from in the Zohar. Because they're looking for it literally written word for word. But what I've understood is, and I'm sure the Chavetz Chaim knew it as well when he wrote the comment, it's only afterwards people said they've never found it inside. Because it doesn't exist as it's written in the books. What they've done is they have calculated. They've run the algorithm per se. If you crunch this idea in the Zohar, the washing, the impurity, because the impurity mentioned in the Zohar is akin to the impurity that comes over a dead body. Thus, if you don't wash, it's like you're obligated to die because your hands have the status of a severe impurity. This is called Torah of Emunah, Torah of faith. Right? When you sleep at night, you're giving yourself over to death. That's why when you wake up, you say, thank God. So, Emodani, right? Thank God you restored my life. I had faith that when I went to sleep and closed my eyes, you would bring me back to life and restore my soul. That's what we say when we go to sleep and we wake up. So the idea is that when you wake up, before you get that soul back, you're supposed to have a proper prayer routine. Now, it's a faith-based thing. Rabbi Nachman talks about this a lot. If you give yourself to faith entity, you yield the bounty of faith. If you don't yield to faith, you don't yield the bounty. I'll give you a very clear example. If you don't believe in God, yet you're a good person, it is not to be compared to he who lives with God in his faith and is still a good person. Do you see the difference? One life will be incredibly richer by the definition of faith with God than if he lives simply as his own moral code of, I'm a good person. This again can be attributed to prophecy versus wisdom. Wisdom says, I know how to be good, leave me alone. Prophecy says, God has revealed himself to me to a certain extent that I know for a fact, by faith, there is a God. Those two lifestyles will never, ever be similar in terms of richness. You know, the atheist can never fathom, God did a miracle for me. It was the help of heaven that made it possible. By divine intervention, all these things, mazal in motion. The other guy says, well, it was a coincidence. It was a superstitious thing. No comparison. So when we take spirituality seriously and waking up in the morning is the best time to do it on a very serious level, should we place our faith there? This is what the rest of the teaching says, is you wake up, you conquer your evil inclination, you wake up like a lion, and you live a day serving God. It's like a zap, like a super dose of coffee when you wake up. And right away, sit up, wash, pray, and then go about your day. And I'm telling you, it changed my life. I'll tell you that much. To really start energized the second you wake up. It's a fantastic way to be, and that's why it's such an important time. So this idea was proven in this week's Parsha, in the Zohar. It talks about dreams, Joseph's dreams. It says like this. This is, everybody asks, because the nature of the work that I do, if I know how to do dream interpretation. The answer is yes, I do. And there's actually something very important people need to know. Don't ever tell your dreams to somebody unless you're confident that they can make it into a blessing. The dream follows the interpretation, and it is 1/60th of a prophecy. Thus, if you tell somebody that turns into a curse, the dream is bound to happen. And where do we see this? Joseph tells his dreams to his brothers. They interpret it for evil. And what was the impetus of selling him to slavery? His dreams that they interpreted for the worse. Now, at the same time, there's the concept of a curse and a blessing. Right? In terms of washing the water is the blessing. The contaminated water that comes out of the washing is cursed. There's Joseph blessed with his dream, cursed in the interpretation. On Purim, we say blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. And we have to get drunk to the point, it's a mitzvah, to where we don't know the difference between the two. The Zohar makes a very nice teaching here. What does it mean until you don't know the difference? That the washing of the hands, for example, is one thing. Right? The blessing of the water is just as valid as the cursed water that came from the blessing. So when we fulfill this commandment, which, by the way, Gerim are a part of. Know that fact. The laws of Purim, Gerim are a part of. When we say you don't know the difference of blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman, what's more important is the washing or the washed? Same thing. And then another teaching in the Zohar is the concept of Zion and Jerusalem. Everyone, you've probably thought this yourselves. What is the difference between Zion and Jerusalem? Jerusalem is din, judgment. Zion is rachamim, mercy. Zion is the internal degree. Jerusalem is the outer degree. Which we'll end the article with that point at the end of the class. A couple weeks ago, the article of the week was based on Abraham and Sarah, the idea that she came in a reincarnation to Abraham after she died through Keturah. That it's a bit of mysticism through the prophecy of the Torah, and the Zohar concurred. Yes, it did. This week, the Zohar concurred that was, in fact, the story with Keturah. Now, how did I get that? When I wrote the article, because the Zohar hinted at it that week, and I went with it. It was very true. I went with it, and this week they clarified it. Very interesting. They say it's a product of the prophecy of the Torah. Okay, how are we doing? Now we're ready for the article. Opening line of the article. We've just come right out, firing on all cylinders. Sinai, Ger Toshav, 12 tribes, Israel, Gerim, prophecy, wisdom, B'nai Noach. Let's just knock out the first paragraph word by word in the major concepts. Sinai. All this stuff is embedded in the node called the tribes in Joseph and Jacob. Just take those three guys, Jacob, Joseph, tribes, blow it up in the regards of the parsha, and that's this first quasi sentence that I wrote. Sinai. Are you a Noahide before Sinai or after Sinai? I.e. the tribes. Are you today? What about if you're a Noahide today and you hold before Sinai? What if you are a Noahide before Sinai and you hold after Sinai? If you hold by Sinai, are you a Ger Toshav? Are you a B'nai Noach? Are you a Chasid Amos Ha'olam, the righteous of the nations? Who are you? 12 tribes. They were before Sinai. What was their status? Israel is defined by Sinai. Thus, the tribes are destined one day to be Israel. But wait a minute. Inside those tribes are going to pick up Gerim at Sinai in Israel. Who are the Gerim? Those that are not Jewish post-Sinai. Prophecy. Is there prophecy today? No. Will it come back? Yes. Did it used to be here? Yes. Was it before Sinai? Yes. Was it wrong to negate it before Sinai, i.e. wisdom? That's what Joseph is punished over. B'nai Noach before Sinai, those that kept Shabbos not like a Jew. After Sinai, they're the Ger Toshav. No more B'nai Noach keeping Shabbos. The term has changed. If you keep Shabbos as B'nai Noach after Sinai, that is forbidden. Because you have not accepted Sinai. You have said, I'm a B'nai Noach before. Let's just continue existing, not paying attention to a history. That is forbidden. You are to keep your 7 laws as they were, no more, no less. In fact, try doing that without the Torah, and the only way to do it is not from wisdom, but from prophecy. The tribes, for example, then go towards Sinai, understanding the future is after Sinai, and they keep the Torah from prophecy, and they are bringing the post-Sinai reality before Sinai. As Abraham before them said, he was a Ger Toshav. Thus, before Sinai, there was idolater or Ger. Or there was, in English, you'd call it a believer. They called them Yehudim. They were not Jews, but the name Judah exists from before Sinai, he who acknowledged God in face of he who denied God. That started the conversion from Isaac, the son of Abraham, all the way through Egypt, which the tribes and Joseph were part of. And they took part of prophecy. And wisdom was brought in as a trespass by Joseph, who transgressed something very, very serious in God's eyes. If you read Song of Songs concerning the redemption, God makes it very clear, do not arouse the time before its end. Joseph is the patriarch to the Messiah, son of Joseph. He who comes as the Redeemer in conjunction with Ben David in the end of days. And what is Joseph's sin all through Bereshis? He wants redemption now. We hear that today with Lubavitchers. We want Mashiach now. Well, Joseph did it before them, and he got busted. You must not press for the end, but rather let it come. Meaning, don't be wiser than God. Use prophecy. If you're not a prophet, then let the prophecies speak for themselves. Joseph wanted to bring pre-Sinai the reality of when prophecy will be taken away. Well, Joseph, maybe prophecy wasn't supposed to be taken away, and maybe it in fact never was. Another concept you'll see inside, 70 faces of the Torah. We know there are 70 interpretations at any moment of Torah, and what I have written is this wisdom prophecy dichotomy should exist all through the Torah as at least one out of 70 faces. It's a euphemism more than a locked-in term. And again, this is what gets a lot of people jumping these days. Anybody before Sinai, guess what you were called? Not a Jew, whether you were Jacob, Isaac, or Abraham, the tribes, you were actually called a Noahide. And the commentaries speak of this very religiously. There was no Jew until after Sinai was decreed. Okay. Now, the subplot of this story is centered around the story of the prohibited act of eating the limb of a live animal. Sure, we all know this law. I actually have been I always work on this one because I find this one to be, it's literal, but I believe it is the source of allegorical halacha law to Noahide. Here's my latest concoction of an interpretation of this law. I think it's true on a philosophical level. Because I've been working on it a long time, and the book that we're writing, Chaim and I, is going to have a lot of svara, logical insight for the world of the Ger. People want to be humble, They say, minimalist. You see minimal housing popping up. And if you think like a rational minimalist, you know what? Don't give me good food. I should just eat to survive, should I not? Isn't it right to just eat to survive? You really shouldn't, gloat and sautéing it for half an hour and flipping it with a wine sauce. And isn't it a little elaborate? So I'm a minimalist. Let me just eat it as minimal as possible. And the answer is no. You have to take it to the ultimate extreme. If you're going to be a minimalist, the ultimate minimalist is rip the leg off and eat it. I.e., eat it raw. Don't cook it. Just eat to live. Eat to survive. Survival is that law. I mean, really, if you want to be an animal about it, just eat the limb of a live animal. What is the opposite of an animal? A person that cooks his food. Think about it. An animal rips it off. Noahide is the code of mankind. What the Torah is saying is, sit down, have a meal, cook it up, make it good, and all the ethical wisdom of the rabbis speaks about when you discuss Torah over food. The food is elevated on high. There's really nothing greater than sitting down to a cooked meal, tasty meal, and really enjoying God in His Torah. And the essence of that is Friday night Shabbos. So I'm not saying the Noahide has this idea of minimalist. That's my shtick. I'm saying a lot of people have an idea of should we partake in elegant food? It's a common question amongst certain circles. How much the word in Hebrew is taiva, bodily pull should we invest in? The point is the Noahide laws are saying don't even go there because the ultimate survival is forbidden. Okay, it's gross, but it's stressing a point to pull in the opposite direction. Don't think minimal. Don't think survive. Rather, think thrive. Think home. Think family. Think home cooked meal. Think Friday night. Let your mind go. Think about it. Let it grow. Let it build a story. Right? As much as there's a prohibition of this, then what is the permission of that? And not permission, but encouragement. To really, because from that encouragement, that is the basis of the Jewish year. When I say Jewish, I'm talking Shabbos and holidays. Some of the mitzvahs of the Torah are to be happy through the meal of the holidays and Shabbat. Thus, there's a concept I always like. If you're scared to death, and you can break a Jewish law by being machmir pekuach nefesh, right? If I'm afraid you're going to starve, so you break something to the extent I was afraid he was going to die. It's a slight permission in law. So by being extreme in the concept of food, eventually what it should yield is the basis of eating properly on Shabbos and holiday, which we learn, by the way, from Noah. All the numbers of sevens went into the ark of the animals and twos. They learn in the Zohar that Noah, his existence is the fabric of Jewish time and the holidays of the year. So a lot of creativity can go into Noahide law, especially the limb of a live animal, to show don't eat just to survive, but thrive through food, the bringing together of community and family, and let it go to its focal point, Shabbos, Friday night. Okay. Now, again, we've painted the picture of Joseph and the tribes. Wisdom versus prophecy. Joseph has his dream, which is a bit prophetic, and at the same time, he's called Ben Zakunim, a son of elders. Interestingly enough, elders, Zakunim, each letter stands for one of the main heads of the tractates of the oral Torah. Zroyim Kodshim Nashim Yeshua's Mayid, which each one of those letters is a group of the 6 orders of the oral Torah. And by that, Joseph adhered very strongly to the wisdom / Torah of Shem's Torah. the logical analysis. Because Jacob was the same way. Now, there's a famous commentary how Jacob won the birthright from Esav. He used, Talmudics. They go through how he won the war. By that right, and when Jacob was a dweller of tents, also by Shem in this right. And Esav was kind of the perversion, not only of prophecy, but of poor wisdom and poor Torah learning. Not to be compared to what Jacob was doing. Not in terms of Tzaddik Russia, just this was not Esav. He was being something he wasn't. He wasn't meant to be, Mr. this and that in Torah. It just wasn't his calling. When Jacob wins the birthright, he inherits that gift that Esav was supposed to have. But for Jacob to win it, he had to outwit Esav. And that we see that in the text. So by Jacob doing so, he really takes on a level of evil inclination, i.e. Esav became internalized in him. This is written about in all the Hasidic Sfarim. Jacob then develops a love of wisdom and Torah, which is fine, but it comes at the peril of not being the prophet he was supposed to be. For this, he's sometimes called Jacob, sometimes Israel. In fact, when he's wrestling with the angel, he asks him what's his name, i.e., he's trying to be wise and cunning rather than prophetically understanding the Mazal. He had struck in his hip socket, and that is his weakness. And that schism developed between Joseph and the tribes. More importantly, in the weeks to come, we'll see Joseph and Judah. So Joseph is the prophet, but he really loves that wisdom. It's like, you're trying to be a mathematician, you're stuck in algebra. Some people just love algebra. I mean, it might be a poor analogy, but the idea is grow into something greater. Largely, understanding one's evil inclination is the power of the past. Clinging to something smaller, not wanting to grow into what we're destined to become. The tribes, when we look at them, they look like the wisdom of Esav. Let's kill our brother, right? So not only are they wise, but it's poor wisdom, and yet we never assume they're prophets, and that's where the story really begins to develop. Now, this whole dichotomy began by Shem. Shem, as it's brought down in the Midrash, was the first one to really blemish by wisdom. By wisdom, Shem got to the tree of life. That's like mixing milk and meat. Imagine he gets to the tree. It's like, imagine if you stole from the tree of life. It's almost like what he did. Now, he did merit the tree of life, but he got there from wisdom. It was his idea to get there. When we finally get to the tree of life from prophecy, i.e. Mashiach ben David, then we will taste no longer the taste of death. This was brought out by Shem when Abraham met with him at the Temple Mount. Shem blesses Abraham as the Kohen Gadol, which is fine. Only he wasn't fit to be a Kohen Gadol because Hagar was his wife. And she wasn't fit for a priest. Shem technically does nothing wrong. But we see it will make an error in what he said. The commentaries suggest that was the perpetual death of Mashiach ben Yosef. Choosing rabbinics over prophecy. Wisdom over prophecy. Eitz hadas tov v'ra, tree of knowledge of good and evil, over the tree of life. When finally Mashiach ben Yosef doesn't die, as he is destined and decreed by heaven to die, Yet when it's like this eating the live flesh again. When we say okay, he's got to die, let's go the opposite of that. Let's not have him die. Let's make sure he lives. And by Joseph it says, Od Yosef Chai. Joseph still lives. When we understand how to fix this by going with prophecy, or taking the Torah's prophecies over contrived wisdom, to really bring the depth and magnitude. Look at the Gerim. Are these a bunch of non-Jews running around trying to be Jews? Or is there something going on with the Ger movement coming back from the times of the first and second temple? Wisdom might say one thing, but what does prophecy say? That is the fractal of this article. Those are the aspects. Now again, to bring it into contemporary, Sinai. If you are a Noahide before Sinai, that's as it was commanded to Adam and Noah. Once it's at Sinai, it has the label Din Yisrael. The law of Israel is upon it. The difference being to accept the 7 Noahide laws from Din Yisrael. Now you're talking about 7 laws routed through Sinai. Now you're talking about Shabbos as Shabbos was given at Sinai. Now you're talking about life towards the world to come in Mashiach. If not, it's pre-Sinai. And that is 7 and that's it. Be a prophet or good luck. Because ultimately, the Torah's success in the commandments is through the Torah of Moses. I.e., you don't have to be a prophet. It can be achieved from wisdom. But what the Ger brings to the table is he is always remembering Shem. And what Shem represented, in a constant remembrance to the Jews, don't forget the prophet. Jews have gotten to a comfort zone where they love wisdom. Just like Joseph prophesied, ironically, what would happen. And what did he do with his prophecy? He negated it to go with wisdom. Preferable is the wise man than prophecy. No. The Ger comes to say, don't press the end. Focus on the prophet. And then the Ger Jew have a prophecy relationship, says the Zohar. All of this comes pre-Sinai, post-Sinai. The Shvatim, the tribes, pre-Sinai. Joseph, pre-Sinai, looking post-Sinai. The Gerim today are post-Sinai. Yet there are those that are antithesis to this pre-Sinai. It's the perpetual table tennis match. And from the mouth of God we heard too. Mepia Gevura. It was at Sinai. We heard, I am Hashem your God, you shall have no other gods. Directed to Israel in the future Gerim. The idea is God can speak two at once. To Jacob and Joseph, they hear one. To the tribes, they hear another. Both are correct as they are prophetically ordained by God. God does this to allow the world to become rectified. Sometimes God calls upon the righteous to bring about a circumstance in the world. Adam was one, Shem was another, Joseph was another. Joseph was inspired to be a wise man. He is rewarded by Mashiach ben Yosef, eventually the one that doesn't die. And that will tip over the final redemption. So souls are asked to do and be put in very difficult scenarios. And Joseph and the tribes are certainly that. As we mentioned, the tribes are looking rather shallow. But what if the tribesmen were actually prophets? When we look at the storyline, does it really add up? I mean, everybody thinks Joseph bumbling along like the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. And then by that time, Reuben went to the house and came home, had a snack, watched Saved by the Bell, got his master's degree. All in the flick of a wrist. No. The tribes were watching Mazal It was a world. They were in Israel. Anyone who's been to Israel today knows it's a busy place. And guess what? Israel never changed. If you don't forget, Abraham was here battling kings. Isaac was all over the land. People were coming through. In fact, if you forgot even that much, Joseph's going to be put in the well, and 2 seconds later, traders are going to take him out. Things are going on. It's a dynamic playground. So the brothers spiritually see, because they read the Mazal. They understand, they can read how things progress through emanation. It could be, as somebody said, some frum guy was praying in a field. They said, "Oh man, there's Joseph, he's coming." God lets it be known what he's going to do. They had time to think. Meaning, the story must not continue as little tiny dots that connect. Well, they were shepherding in about 20 meters radius, and then Joseph came along like the scarecrow. It was a prophetic tale. Look at the whole story of Joseph going to Egypt and Judah. It's a prophetic tale over the entire last 4 parshas of the Torah. The tribes were prophets. And yes, they had some poor wisdom with Judah saying, sell him, don't kill him. But the prophecy was far, far greater. And again, the entire Torah has to be looked at this way. Do we view little dots, A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Or do we view it as A, boom, B, boom? The Torah is a book of prophecy. Perhaps it's time the characters become prophetic. And then we find that our lives become prophetic. What happens when we act out the Torah personalities as the Kabbalistic method of Gilgul or reincarnation? As I've taught before, if you're far away from Torah, you don't know what you're doing. The more in Torah you get, you start to get mazal. You sense what you're doing. It becomes familiar. Until your actions are actually accountable and recognizable. And when you perfect a story in the Torah, you get a spark of that prophecy in you as a repair of soul. That is the Torah definition of one type of reincarnation, where you actually are in line with the Torah and you absorb it in your being. That's where life becomes prophetic. And you don't have to use little logical wisdoms. Well, I went to do this, I went to do that. Just say it what it is. You are inspired by God. No harm, no foul. Back in the day, that's how you served God, was through prophetic inspiration. The Torah was spiritual of Shem. Today, we've allowed it to become rather physical. Well, I'm just doing this for the reward. I'm not really interested. Low-level wisdom. How about if you recognize the prophecy of where we are in time, what the prophets have said? Maybe then you can begin to be a little more enthusiastic and fulfill the commandments from prophecy, either by doing them, or recognizing them, or living them. Which is kind of an insult to the Noahide that says, I reject the Torah, I reject Sinai, I want my 7 and that's it. Okay. Good luck being a prophet by yourself. Wish you all the best. So too, the Jew needs to realize in the end of days, wisdom was great. It yielded a lot of Torah, but you need to accept the prophet or the prophecies, the Tanakh, all that is entailed. In the story of the limb of the live animal, what happened? The idea is that they through Kabbalah they were able to make, I think, a cow, and they ate the limb of it. It was a golem, it was not a real birth or some kind of allowance spiritually where they're not transgressing. Joseph then comes upon them and sees them eating the limb of a live animal. He says, "Man, you guys are in trouble," and he thinks they're going to say, "Well, if we were Jews, it wouldn't be illegal. Because there's a bit of a difference between eating the limb of a live animal of a Jew and versus a Noahide. And the idea is that Joseph would say that. And they're saying, no, Joseph, we are pre-Sinai, we're not Jews. And the fact is, you're busted. You use wisdom and not prophecy. The Torah must commence with prophecy. And you are using wisdom. We find you accountable and guilty. Now these guys took it serious. They held of the Torah of Hashem and prophecy, the whole 9 yards. And Joseph is all the time in the dream, which is prophetic, and he's putting his own wisdom on it. Once he tells them the map, it's no longer the territory. He didn't tell them, let them interpret the dream. He put it on them. He confused it. They said, enough of this. No way is Mashiach going to come out of this. No way. So let's let God handle it. Let's put him in the pit and see what happens with him. Mazal. If it's meant to be, it'll be. If anybody's watched Star Trek, there's a semi-divine being called Q. I worked this out. How is it that Q can manipulate reality of the characters? The answer is very simple. Q can make you look like a chicken and hatch you from an egg, and eventually you always end up back to being Jean-Luc Picard. Why? Because in reality, whatever has to be, has to be. God made this world. It is prophetic. You will do your job. You can be as wise as you want, like you, but you will do your job. So the brothers are saying, if Jacob is meant to have 12 sons, we are the future Israel, and redemption comes from this team. God will find a way. And you see they were going to let him die, and let's say he was going to really find a way. Judah comes along with the axiom, Yehuda Matzilis Yosef. Judah always saves Joseph and says, let's sell him, see what happens. Now, you might say I'm speaking like a fairy tale here, but what happens next week? And the week after, Judah runs into Joseph. How do you like that, Mazel? The plan worked. And Joseph says, Ani Yosef. I am Joseph. Now, if you've never heard of Kiddush Hashem before, let that be the first one. Because that is the essence of redemption in the end of Genesis. Only Joseph at the end goes back to wisdom over prophecy and circumcises the Egyptians. They're saying, oh, he did it again. And they say, okay, we're ready to be your slaves, we're sorry. And he does it again. And the book ends. Moses comes next book, and that becomes the fractal of time. We keep living this story. You get that grace of prophecy, and you go back to your wisdom. Eventually, you rectify Adam by simply doing only what God tells you to do. All these efforts that happen are ramifications for today. Joseph's dream, we're living it. We're living it. We're living in an era of Mashiach and Yosef dying and dying and dying until we get it right. And the Noahide laws and prophecy and wisdom, you name it. Who was Jacob, a Jew or a Noahide? All these questions. These are what we deal with. Fate versus free will. Mazal. Blessing and curse. You name it. Nothing's changed. This is what goes on in the lunchroom. Talking about these questions. Who's Mashiach? Who is Esav? Does Joseph really take out Esav? I've heard it. Does it make sense? All these questions. Every religion taking their little piece of the puzzle. Last week we talked about religion. This week we're saying, what's it really about? what is the message of the Torah and of Israel? This is the basis of all philosophy of the Torah. From this, you'll get existentialism, Eov, Moses' work. It really all comes into what is the art of the prophet, what is the art of wisdom. And that's going to beg even a bigger question. Who was Shem really? And where is he in our Torah? How do we understand Shem? How do we get, did Moses put him in even? And the answer is, yes, it's all there. And we work it out through the whole year. We see Shem is the Torah of life that comes from wisdom. And yes, he breached in the wisdom. And yes, we'll go back to prophecy. Yes, Shem has the tools of prophecy. The ways of the prophets are the tools of the Tanakh. Learning the Tanakh as a book of prophecy. But if you're not aware that that's what you're doing, good luck learning it. Welcome the Ger. The Ger is always here to say, this is not rabbinics, this is not wisdom. This is the tools of prophecy. And just as they were then, so it is till today. You can connect A to B in a very shallow way. But you want A to B really, really a big deal. A to B prophetically, making the dots connect in a profound way. When that happens, the rabbinic rectifications of Mashiach ben Yosef will revert into what's called Melech Mashiach, the King Messiah, where the Torah emanates from a time period called the King Messiah, from the time period of 2,000 years of Mashiach ben Yosef. Are they men? Yes. But are they also times? Yes. From the mouth of God we heard too. Eventually Yosef lives. Eventually the contradictions are resolved. As King David said very clearly, the final redemption is dependent on the laws of Noah. And for that, King David wrote Tehillim as a memoir of the righteousness of Noah, says the Midrash. And the article ends with the prophecies of Zion, Amen, and soon in our days, we say the prophecies of Zion. Whether it be prophets, the words of the prophets, the actions of prophecy that we do from then until today. Connect the word prophet, prophecy, however you like to conjugate it, and connect it to Zion and not Yerushalayim. The inner level of Zion, where Torah flows to the universe. If we can sit next to that well of Zion, just like Jacob and Moses sat by wells, we will get that mazel in our lives. That hand of God that brings us Torah on a prophetic level into our lives. And then instead of having the harshness of Jerusalem, which anyone that's been there sees that's what it is, in a 7-law, rigid environment, do or die, turning it into the well springs of Zion, where the Torah will go forth, where Jews will be commanded in 620 commandments, 7 plus 613. And the Noahites will have 7, and the sky is the limit. Should they wish to go 8, 9, 620, convert, not convert? The point is, everything will be made available. The prophecies of God will dictate the word of God to everybody what they are meant to do, simply by calling their name. And the name as we know it, it might be a wisdom to know the name. But the greatest secret of all is that in everyone's name is the essence of the Torah, and that essence is called a word that we all know and love, prophecy. Thank you very much. Have a great week. See you next week for the Parsha.